Hello Mouses! This week I've been out to Bolton Museum to have a look at their Egyptology display. I'm a big fan of Bolton Museum. It's got a lot of very interesting stuff. So a section on natural history, a section on Bolton's history, a section on art, which I adore, and a section on Egyptology, because Bolton has a lot of links to Egypt. So I thought we'd have a look at what's been going on in the displays and give you a good idea of what you can see if you go along there yourself. Okay, we're going to have a look at some of the exhibits that are in the Bolton Museum's Egyptology section. This isn't everything, but we're going to have a look around and see what we've got here. A lot of this here is examples of items that were either brought back or manufactured because of people going to Egypt and a cross-cultural exchange, which has helped Bolton, especially with its spinning mills and fabrics and things like that, to develop as a town. We've got here one of the first of many examples of Egyptian jars and pottery. It's fascinating to think that a lot of this, the manufacturing process is different, of course, but a lot of the styles and the looks of pots and things like that, I mean, look at that one that's in the background. They wouldn't look out of place now in a modern house, and I think that's fascinating that over thousands of years, once you've got a design that works, it hasn't really changed an awful lot. Now these I find interesting. They're little statues of baboons. I have different artistic styles. I mean, Egypt, when it got to a certain level of artistic style, it very much froze, but you can see the development of that style over the centuries beforehand until they got to what is essentially their "this one works, we'll keep it" style, which is what you see in awful lot of carvings and hieroglyphs and things like that. Now we've got some more examples of pottery, and you've got to admit that a lot of this design, the glazes, the colouring styles, they wouldn't look out of place in a modern home, but these are thousands of years old. So to a certain extent, I think we say that Egypt has a style that, once they got to one that worked, has pretty much stayed stagnant, but we've done the same. Bowls and other items like that, simple pottery, it has changed very little. And we've got some other examples of flatware here and just basic pottery designs. They do look like they could be fit in any time period. Even the jewellery, we'll see examples of jewellery in a moment there with beads. We'd see that now. A lot of people still wear this kind of bead jewellery, and it's fascinating to think that although these cultures are separated by centuries, they're very much the same to certain extents. You've got to look at it and think, wow, this must have taken an awful lot of time and effort and skill. But then again, I suppose with Egypt employing what is essentially slave labour, the skill and the human factor probably weren't coming into much consideration. More along the lines of just do it because you're told to. But even so, the artwork, it's still impressive, especially when you think that this is a culture that is pretty much Stone Age. The Egyptians in the time period would have been Stone Age and early Metal Ages, which makes it even more impressive. Unfortunately, you can see my hands reflected in the glass there. There's not an awful lot you can do about that. But not all of the pottery has lasted, of course it hasn't, because these are thousands and thousands of years old. But even with the shards, you can see that the technology is very much the same as what we'd use now. Examples of what appears to be fishing hooks and things like that. So that's a side that we never learned about, especially I certainly didn't learn about it at school. When we studied Egypt at school, it was very much the pyramids and slavery and things like that, but not the way people actually lived, which is very different, and to a certain extent I think would have made it come alive even more, and I probably would have got an awful lot more out of history lessons at the time if we'd studied the people rather than just the massive artifacts that they left behind. We've got examples here of the Egyptian logographs that became the hieroglyphs, and I always find that fascinating. I'm very much a linguist in that sense. I love languages, and the way that they've got these pictures that express a certain idea, like bird or flight and things like that, and then they've developed that into these hieroglyphs that still mean the same thing when you look at them, but also have another meaning in association with one another. It's fascinating to me how that develops in any culture, but Egypt especially because of the way the hieroglyphs look. I just love the way they look. But it's also fascinating to me that people have managed to look at these, what are essentially pictures, and said, no, they're not just pictures. That's a language. It's different to what we have, but it's still a language. I found that fascinating. But perhaps that's just me. I suppose from a language lover's point of view, that is one of the more amazing parts of looking at historical and prehistorical societies. We've got here a depiction of a pyramid, and it's also fascinating to look at the fact that we see the pyramid as just the steps or the slopes. This is a step pyramid, of course, but there would have been massive walkways up to it, and it would have sat on the ground rather than being buried into it, because of course the ground level's risen. So just to see it there as a depiction is amazing. And this as well, the Egyptian ship, where it's rowing, and it has rudimentary sails. And I saw a documentary in the early 90s that suggested that the Egyptians could have got to South America using their ships. And yes, they very much could have. The Vikings had a similar style of ship with the rowing and sails, but basic sails, not the style of the ones that the Spanish used when they discovered America. Rediscovered even. But to think that they could have got there is surprising to a certain extent, but yes, they probably could. Did they have cross-Atlantic trade? Possibly not, but it was technically possible. I mean, if they'd really wanted to, I suppose they could have, if they knew it was there and had the technology. They certainly had the technology. Some of these depictions, when you look at it and think, how on earth did they get the clear images that we know for the hieroglyphs now of some of these? But this here, this is what always brings me back to the museum. It is the Rosetta Stone. Well, it's a copy of the Rosetta Stone, it's not the original. But to look at it and say, there's 3 different distinct languages on there. And without this item, we probably wouldn't understand hieroglyphs to the extent that we do now. This is just amazing. It's such a stroke of luck to have found it. Again, to look at that and say, no, those aren't just depictions of ideas. That's a language. Someone's actually noticed that, because I look at it and think it's squiggles. Even though I know it's a language, it just looks so alien to me that would I, as just an average person, recognize that as a language, or would I look at it as some symbols that are surrounding an obvious image? So is it just an image? Now this is where a lot of people will be coming to the Egyptology displays for the mummy and the caskets. It's what we all associate with Egypt. It's what we studied at school and things like that. Again, I think the focus on 1 or 2 parts of Egyptology is a bad idea in schools, but even when you see it up close, it's still fascinating. The reverence they had for the dead and the idea of being able to cheat death and come back. It's amazing to look at. And the thing I am a bit concerned about with this is, in this display, not this one, but the one below, we'll see it in a moment, is an actual dead body. It's a mummy. And it's not a replica, it's the actual thing. And I wonder, is that good or bad? I mean, it's good that we get to see a display and see what they were like, but at the same time, they've moved someone's corpse from its resting place. And I'm not sure that's the best idea. Okay, that's pretty much all we got time for, so I'm going to cut it there. There is a lot more in the displays that you could see that we haven't had time to film or show, so perhaps we'll go back at another time and see the rest of it. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. If you did like this, remember to click the like button, share it with your friends so that they can have a look at some interesting Egyptian history as well, and do subscribe for future videos because there will be more in the future. But until next time, I've been Kirk-Robinson, you've been watching the Zog on ZJKR, and I'll see you next time.